Sarah Martinez stepped out of her silver Honda Civic at the Riverside Shopping Center, the afternoon sun casting long shadows across the parking lot. Her 8-year-old son Miguel bounced excitedly beside her, clutching a crumpled $20 bill his grandmother had given him for his birthday. Today was special. They were finally going to buy the remote-controlled helicopter he had been dreaming about for months. Sarah smiled as she watched Miguel's enthusiasm. At 32, she had learned to treasure these simple moments. Her life had been anything but ordinary, though few people who saw her now would guess her background. Standing at 5 feet 6 inches with shoulder-length brown hair and wearing a simple blue sundress, she looked like any other suburban mother running weekend errands with her child. The shopping center buzzed with typical Saturday afternoon activity. Families moved between stores, teenagers gathered near the food court, and elderly couples walked slowly along the covered walkways. Sarah and Miguel made their way toward the electronics store, weaving through the crowd of shoppers. "Mom, do you think they'll have the red one? The one with the camera?" Miguel asked, his dark eyes bright with anticipation. "We'll see, sweetheart. If not, maybe we can order it online," Sarah replied, ruffling his hair affectionately. As they approached the electronics store, Sarah noticed 3 men loitering near the entrance. Something about their body language immediately caught her attention. The way they stood, how their eyes scanned the crowd, their positioning relative to each other, and the exit routes. Years of training had made her acutely aware of potential threats, even in civilian settings. The men appeared to be in their 20s and 30s. The tallest one, with bleached blonde hair and numerous tattoos covering his arms, seemed to be the leader. He wore a black tank top that displayed a Confederate flag tattoo across his shoulder blade. The second man was shorter and stockier, with a shaved head and a thick gold chain around his neck. The third was thin and wiry, constantly fidgeting with a toothpick between his teeth. Sarah's instincts told her to avoid them, but Miguel was already heading toward the store entrance. She quickened her pace to catch up with him, hoping to slip past the group unnoticed. "Excuse me," she said politely as they approached the door. The blond man stepped directly into her path, blocking their way. His breath smelled of alcohol and cigarettes as he leered down at her. Well, what do we have here?" he said loudly, causing other shoppers to turn and look. "Another one of these people thinking they belong in our neighborhood." Sarah felt her stomach tighten. She had faced discrimination before, but usually not so blatantly or aggressively. Her Hispanic heritage was evident in her features, and she had learned to navigate the subtle and not-so-subtle prejudices that still existed in many communities. "We're just trying to shop," Sarah said calmly, instinctively stepping slightly in front of Miguel. "Please let us pass." The stocky man laughed harshly. "Oh, she's polite. Real polite. But politeness doesn't change what you are, does it?" Miguel pressed closer to his mother, confusion and fear beginning to show in his young face. He didn't fully understand what was happening, but he could sense the danger in these men's voices. "Mom?" he whispered, tugging at her dress. "It's okay, baby," Sarah said softly, never taking her eyes off the 3 men. She was rapidly assessing the situation, escape routes, potential weapons, the proximity of security or other help. The shopping center had security guards, but she couldn't see any nearby. The thin man with the toothpick stepped closer, invading their personal space. "Maybe you should take your little boy and go back where you came from. This is America, and we don't want your kind here." Sarah's jaw tightened, but she kept her voice steady. "We are Americans. This is our neighborhood too. Now please, move aside so we can go into the store." The blonde leader's face darkened with anger. "Your neighborhood? You people are like a disease, spreading everywhere, taking jobs from real Americans, bringing your drugs and violence with you." A small crowd was beginning to gather, but rather than helping, most people seemed to be treating it like entertainment. Some pulled out their phones to record, while others whispered among themselves. Sarah realized with growing concern that she and Miguel were essentially on their own. "I'm not looking for trouble," Sarah said, her military training keeping her voice level despite her rising anger. "I just want to buy my son a toy. Please let us pass." The stocky man reached out and grabbed Sarah's arm roughly. "Maybe we need to teach you some respect first. Show you how things work around here." The moment he touched her, everything changed. Sarah's body tensed, muscle memory from years of intensive training flooding back. But With Miguel beside her, she couldn't react the way every fiber of her being wanted to. She had to think of his safety first. "Take your hands off me," she said, her voice dropping to a dangerous level that the men were too drunk and aggressive to recognize as a warning. Instead of backing down, the thin man reached toward Miguel. "Maybe the kid needs to learn some manners too." "Don't touch him," Sarah snapped, stepping protectively in front of her son. The blonde leader shoved her hard, causing her to stumble backward. Miguel cried out in fear and anger. "Leave my mom alone," the 8-year-old shouted, his small fists clenched. This seemed to amuse the three men greatly. They laughed as if Miguel's defiance was the funniest thing they had ever seen. "Oh, the little man wants to fight," the stocky one said mockingly. "Maybe we should teach him how real men handle mouthy women." Sarah's mind was racing. She was calculating distances, angles, the most efficient way to neutralize the threat while keeping Miguel safe. But she also knew that any action she took would likely escalate the situation dramatically. These men had no idea who they were dealing with, but once she revealed her capabilities, there would be no going back. The crowd around them was growing larger, but still no one intervened. Sarah could hear someone calling mall security on their phone, but help would not arrive in time if the situation turned violent. The blonde man reached for Sarah again, this time more aggressively. "Time to show you your place," he snarled. As his hand closed around her wrist, Sarah made a decision. She couldn't let these men harm Miguel, and their behavior was escalating beyond verbal harassment. But she would give them one more chance to walk away before she did something they would all regret. "I'm warning you," she said quietly, her voice carrying a steel edge that came from years of commanding respect in one of the military's most elite units. "Let go of me now and walk away. You don't want to do this." The three men exchanged glances and burst into laughter. They had no idea that the woman they were harassing had spent years training with the most dangerous combat specialists in the world. They didn't know that she had completed missions in hostile territories where split-second decisions meant the difference between life and death. They saw only what they wanted to see: a Hispanic woman with a child, someone they believed they could intimidate and abuse without consequences. The stocky man stepped forward and put his hands on Miguel's shoulders, causing the boy to cry out in fear. "Maybe we'll start with the kid, teach him some respect for his betters." Sarah's world went red. Every protective instinct she possessed, magnified by years of military training and the fierce love of a mother, exploded into action. The men who thought they could assault her and threaten her child were about to learn that they had made the biggest mistake of their lives. But, for now, they still thought they had the upper hand. They had no idea that Sarah Martinez had spent 5 years as a Navy SEAL, one of only a handful of women ever to complete the grueling training and serve in that elite unit. They didn't know that she had skills that could end this confrontation in seconds, but was restraining herself only out of concern for her son's safety and trauma. The thin man reached into his pocket and pulled out a switchblade, flicking it open with a practiced motion. The blade gleamed in the afternoon sun streaming through the shopping center skylights. "Maybe this will help convince you that you're not welcome here," he said, holding the knife where Miguel could see it clearly. Sarah's son pressed against her leg, trembling with fear, but trying to be brave like his mother had taught him. He didn't understand why these men hated them, why they wanted to hurt his mom for no reason. All he knew was that his mother was the strongest, smartest person he knew, and somehow she would keep him safe. The crowd around them gasped at the sight of the knife, and several people began backing away. Someone screamed. The situation had crossed from harassment into something far more dangerous. Sarah looked down at Miguel's frightened face, then back at the three men who thought they had trapped a helpless woman and child. They were about to learn just how wrong they were. The question was no longer whether she would fight back, but how much damage she would do when she finally unleashed the skills that had made her one of the most feared warriors in the United States military. The blonde leader grinned maliciously, confident that the knife had shifted the balance of power completely in their favor. He had no way of knowing that he had just threatened the child of someone who had been trained to neutralize armed opponents as efficiently as breathing. Sarah took a deep breath and prepared to show these men exactly what happened when someone threatened a Navy SEAL's child. The moment the thin man brandished the switchblade, something fundamental shifted in Sarah Martinez. The protective mother who had been trying to de-escalate the situation was replaced by the highly trained operative who had served in some of the most dangerous places on Earth. Her breathing became controlled and measured. Her stance shifted almost imperceptibly, weight balanced on the balls of her feet. Her eyes took on a cold, calculating quality that scanned each man for weaknesses and threats. "Miguel, step behind me and don't move," she said quietly, her voice carrying an authority that made her 8-year-old son immediately obey without question. The blonde leader noticed the change in her demeanor, but misinterpreted it as fear. "That's right, lady. Now you understand the situation. Maybe if you get on your knees and apologize for bringing your kind into our space, we might let you walk away with just a few bruises." Sarah's response was swift and devastating. In one fluid motion, she grabbed the wrist of the man holding the knife, twisted it with surgical precision, and heard the satisfying crack of bones breaking. The switchblade clattered to the ground as the thin man screamed in agony, clutching his mangled wrist. Before the other two could react, Sarah had already moved. She drove her elbow into the solar plexus of the stocky man, doubling him over, then brought her knee up into his face. The impact broke his nose with a wet crunch, sending blood streaming down his shirt. The blonde leader finally realized that this was not the helpless victim they had targeted. He swung a wild haymaker at Sarah's head, but she ducked under it effortlessly and drove her fist into his kidney with enough force to drop him to his knees. The entire confrontation had lasted less than 10 seconds. 3 grown men who moments earlier had been terrorizing a mother and child now lay groaning on the ground, nursing broken bones and wondering what had just hit them. The crowd that had gathered to watch what they thought would be an assault on a defenseless woman now stood in stunned silence. Several people had their phones out, recording the aftermath of what they had just witnessed. Sarah quickly picked up the switchblade and closed it, slipping it into her pocket as evidence. She then knelt down beside Miguel, who was staring at his mother with a mixture of awe and confusion. "Are you okay, baby?" she asked softly, her voice immediately returning to the gentle tone she always used with her son. Miguel nodded, still processing what he had just seen. "Mom, how did you do that? You were like a superhero." Before Sarah could answer, the sound of running footsteps announced the arrival of mall security. 2 guards in their 20s came rushing up, both slightly out of breath and looking uncertain about what they had walked into. "What happened here?" the first guard asked, looking between Sarah and the 3 men on the ground. "These men assaulted me and threatened my child with a knife," Sarah explained calmly, maintaining the composed demeanor that had served her well during military debriefings. "I defended myself and my son." The thin man, still clutching his broken wrist, struggled to sit up. "That crazy woman attacked us. We were just talking to her, and she went psycho." Several people in the crowd immediately spoke up, contradicting his version of events. "That's not true. I saw the whole thing," shouted a teenage girl with purple hair. "Those guys were being really racist and mean to her. One of them had a knife." An elderly man with a walking cane nodded vigorously. "The young lady is right. Those hooligans were harassing this mother and her child. They got exactly what they deserved." A middle-aged woman stepped forward, holding up her phone. "I recorded most of it. These 3 men were clearly the aggressors. She only defended herself after they became physical and pulled a weapon." The second security guard was already on his radio, calling for police and paramedics. The stocky man with the broken nose was having trouble breathing properly, and the thin man's wrist was beginning to swell dramatically. Sarah remained calm and cooperative as more security personnel arrived, followed quickly by paramedics and police officers. She provided a clear, factual account of what had occurred, backed up by multiple witness testimonies and the woman's video recording. Detective Lisa Chun, a 20-year veteran of the local police force, arrived to take charge of the investigation. She was a small woman with graying hair and sharp, intelligent eyes that missed nothing. As she interviewed witnesses and reviewed the phone footage, she began to piece together a picture of what had really happened. "Ma'am, I need to ask you a few questions," Detective Chin said to Sarah. "Your response to their attack was quite efficient. Do you have any combat training?" Sarah hesitated for a moment. Her military service was a part of her life she rarely discussed, especially not in front of Miguel. But, Given the circumstances, she knew she would have to reveal at least some of her background. "I served in the Navy," she said simply. "I received combat training as part of my service." Detective Chin nodded, making notes. Something about Sarah's bearing, her precise language, and the clinical efficiency with which she had neutralized 3 attackers suggested there was more to her story than basic military training. The paramedics worked on the 3 injured men, while police officers took statements from witnesses. The thin man required immediate transport to the hospital for his broken wrist, while the stocky man needed treatment for his shattered nose and possible concussion. The blonde leader had bruised ribs and a kidney contusion that would keep him in considerable pain for weeks. As the investigation continued, more details emerged about Sarah's attackers. All 3 had criminal records involving assault, drug possession, and hate crimes. The blonde leader, whose name was Derek Morrison, had recently been released from prison after serving 2 years for a racially motivated attack on a Hispanic family. "It looks like you picked the wrong person to mess with this time," Detective Chun told Morrison as he was loaded into an ambulance, his hands cuffed to the stretcher. Morrison glared at Sarah with undisguised hatred. "This isn't over. We know who you are now. We'll find you." "I wouldn't recommend that," Detective Chin replied dryly. "Something tells me it wouldn't end any better for you the second time around." While the police wrapped up their investigation, Sarah tried to comfort Miguel, who was struggling to understand everything that had happened. He kept looking at his mother with new eyes, as if seeing her for the first time. "Mom, were you a soldier?" he asked quietly as they sat on a bench outside the electronics store. "Yes, sweetheart. Before you were born, I served our country in the Navy. But that's not important right now. What's important is that you're safe. But why didn't you ever tell me you were so strong? Why don't you ever talk about being in the Navy?" Sarah pulled her son close, struggling with how much to reveal. Miguel was only 8 years old, too young to understand the full reality of her military service, the missions she had undertaken, or the reasons she had left that life behind. "Being a soldier was my job before you came along," she explained carefully. "But being your mom is the most important job I've ever had. Sometimes grown-ups do things they don't like to talk about, especially when it might scare or worry the people they love." Miguel nodded solemnly, accepting his mother's explanation even as his mind buzzed with questions he was too young to articulate. Detective Chun approached them as the last of the paramedics departed. "Mrs. Martinez, I need to inform you that all 3 men will be charged with assault, hate crimes, and weapons violations. Given their criminal histories and the video evidence, they'll likely face significant prison time." "What about the threats Morrison made as they took him away?" Sarah asked. "We'll add intimidation of a witness to his charges. But between you and me, I don't think he'll be bothering you again. Word has a way of getting around about what happened here today. These types of bullies usually only target people they think can't fight back." Sarah nodded, but she wasn't entirely convinced. In her experience, men like Morrison didn't let go of their hatred easily, especially when they had been publicly humiliated. She would need to be careful and watchful in the days and weeks ahead. As they finally entered the electronics store to buy Miguel's helicopter, Sarah reflected on how quickly their ordinary Saturday afternoon had transformed into something that would likely make local news. She had hoped to keep her military background private, to give Miguel a normal childhood free from the shadows of her past service. But perhaps it was naive to think she could completely separate her 2 lives. The skills and instincts that had made her an effective Navy SEAL weren't things she could simply turn off when she became a civilian. They were part of who she was, woven into her DNA through years of intensive training and real-world experience. Miguel chatted excitedly about the remote-controlled helicopter as they walked through the store, but Sarah noticed how he kept glancing at her with a new kind of respect and curiosity. The innocence of their relationship had been altered by what he had witnessed. He had seen his mother as something more than just mom. He had glimpsed the warrior she had once been. As they stood in line to pay for the helicopter, Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message from her former commanding officer, Captain Rodriguez. Word traveled fast in military circles, especially when it involved one of their own. "Heard about your afternoon adventure. Nice work, Martinez. Once a SEAL, always a SEAL. Stay sharp." Sarah smiled slightly as she deleted the message. She had tried to leave that world behind, but perhaps it would always be part of her, ready to emerge when her family was threatened. As she watched Miguel's excitement over his new toy, she realized that maybe that wasn't such a bad thing after all. The story of Sarah Martinez's confrontation with the three attackers spread through their small town of Riverside like wildfire. By Monday morning, local news stations were running the story, and the cell phone video had been viewed thousands of times online. The headlines ranged from Navy SEAL mom defends son from racist attackers to when bullies pick the wrong target. Sarah tried to maintain normalcy for Miguel's sake, walking him to school as she did every morning. But she couldn't ignore the whispered conversations that stopped when she passed, the pointing fingers, and the mixture of admiration and curiosity in people's eyes. "Mom, everyone at school is talking about you," Miguel said as they approached Lincoln Elementary. "Tommy Rodriguez says his dad showed him the video on the news. He says you're famous now." Sarah sighed, adjusting Miguel's backpack straps. "Being famous isn't always a good thing, sweetheart. I just want things to go back to normal." But normal seemed increasingly out of reach. As Miguel ran off to join his friends, Sarah noticed several other parents watching her with expressions she couldn't quite read. Some seemed impressed, others appeared wary, as if they weren't sure what to make of this revelation about the quiet single mother they had known for years. At work, Sarah's colleagues at the community health clinic where she worked as a nurse practitioner greeted her with a mixture of amazement and questions she wasn't prepared to answer. Her supervisor, Dr. Patricia Williams, called her into the office first thing Monday morning. "Sarah, I have to ask, is it true? Were you really a Navy SEAL?" Dr. Williams, a kind woman in her 50s who had always treated Sarah more like a daughter than an employee, looked both concerned and fascinated. Sarah sat across from her supervisor's desk, the same way she had sat across from countless commanding officers during her military career. "Yes, it's true. I served for 5 years before Miguel was born. But you never mentioned it. In all the years you've worked here, you've never talked about your military service beyond saying you were in the Navy." "It wasn't relevant to my work here," Sarah replied carefully. "I prefer to focus on the present, not the past." Dr. Williams leaned forward, her expression serious. "Sarah, you know I have nothing but respect for your service, but I have to ask, are you and Miguel safe? The news reports mentioned threats from one of the men you incapacitated." Sarah had been asking herself the same question since Saturday. Derek Morrison and his associates represented the kind of small-minded hatred that didn't simply disappear after a single defeat. If anything, being humiliated by a woman they considered inferior might make them more dangerous. "I'm taking precautions," Sarah said. "I've contacted some former colleagues who are helping me assess the threat level." What she didn't mention was that 2 of those former colleagues, Marcus Thompson and Elena Vasquez, were already on their way to Riverside. When word of the incident reached their old unit, several of Sarah's former teammates had immediately offered their assistance. The bonds forged in the SEALs didn't weaken with time or distance. After work, Sarah picked up Miguel from his after-school program and drove to a coffee shop across town where she was meeting Marcus. She hadn't seen him in over 2 years, but he looked exactly the same, tall, broad-shouldered, with intelligent gray eyes and the relaxed confidence that came from years of elite military training. "Sarah," Marcus said, standing to embrace her as she entered with Miguel. "You look good. Civilian life suits you." "Most of the time," Sarah replied with a wry smile. "Miguel, this is Marcus. He used to work with Mommy in the Navy." Miguel studied Marcus with the careful assessment of an 8-year-old trying to determine if this stranger was trustworthy. "Are you a Navy SEAL too?" Marcus knelt down to Miguel's eye level. "I was, yeah. Your mom and I were on the same team. She was one of the best soldiers I ever served with." While Miguel played with his helicopter at a nearby table, Marcus and Sarah discussed the situation in low voices. "I did some checking on Derek Morrison and his friends," Marcus said, sliding a folder across the table. "Morrison has connections to a white supremacist group called the True Patriots. They're not just random thugs. They're part of an organized network that's been involved in several hate crimes across 3 states. Sarah felt her stomach tighten as she reviewed the documents. Photos of Morrison at rallies, police reports detailing attacks on minority families, and intelligence reports suggesting the group was planning larger-scale operations. "It gets worse," Marcus continued. "Morrison made bail this morning. His lawyer argued that his injuries required specialized medical care that the county jail couldn't provide. He's out, and, according to my sources, he's been making calls to his supremacist friends. Sarah closed the folder and looked across the coffee shop at her son, who was completely absorbed in making his helicopter perform aerial maneuvers between the tables. The weight of her past life was crashing into her carefully constructed present, threatening to destroy the safe, normal world she had built for Miguel. "What are you thinking?" Marcus asked, reading the expression on her face. "I'm thinking about taking Miguel and disappearing for a while. We could go stay with my sister in Colorado until this blows over. Running isn't like you, Sarah. Besides, how long would you run? These people don't forget, and they have resources. Better to deal with the threat now, on your terms, than spend the rest of your life looking over your shoulder." That evening, after Miguel had gone to bed, Sarah found herself standing in her bedroom closet, looking at a locked metal box she hadn't opened in over 3 years. Inside were items from her military service that she had hoped never to need again: tactical gear, communication equipment, and documents that could help her access resources most civilians couldn't imagine. As she hesitated with the key in her hand, her phone rang. The caller ID showed a number she didn't recognize. Sarah Martinez? The voice was unfamiliar, with a slight southern accent. "Who is this?" "Let's just say I'm a friend of Derek Morrison's. We know who you are now, and we know where you live. That was quite a show you put on at the mall, but you caught us off guard. Next time will be different." Sarah's blood ran cold. "What do you want?" "We want you to understand that there are consequences for what you did. Morrison is in the hospital because of you, and that kind of disrespect can't go unanswered. You and your little boy need to learn your place." The line went dead before Sarah could respond. She immediately called the police to report the threat, but she knew that official channels would only go so far. Men like this operated in the shadows, and they were patient. They would wait for the right moment, when law enforcement wasn't watching, when she was vulnerable. Sarah opened the metal box and began inventorying its contents. If Morrison's friends wanted to escalate this situation, they would discover that threatening a Navy SEAL's child was the worst mistake they could possibly make. The next morning, Elena Vasquez arrived in Riverside. Like Marcus, she was a former SEAL, though she had transitioned into private security work after leaving the military. Elena was smaller than Sarah, with dark hair and the kind of unassuming appearance that made people underestimate her, a mistake that had proved fatal for several enemies during their joint missions overseas. "So, you managed to stay out of trouble for almost 4 years," Elena said as they met for breakfast while Miguel was at school. "That might be a record for our old unit." "Trouble found me," Sarah replied. "I was just trying to buy my kid a toy." Elena's expression grew serious as Sarah recounted the threatening phone call from the night before. "Marcus filled me in on Morrison's connections. This True Patriots group has been on federal law enforcement's radar for months. They're suspected in at least 6 hate-motivated attacks, including the bombing of a mosque in Tennessee last year." "Are you saying the FBI is involved?" "Not officially, but there are people who would very much like to see this organization dismantled. Sometimes that requires unconventional approaches." Sarah understood what Elena was suggesting. There were aspects of national security that operated beyond the reach of traditional law enforcement, gray areas where former special operations personnel sometimes found new purposes. "I just want to keep my son safe," Sarah said. "I don't want to go back to that world." "Sometimes we don't get to choose," Elena replied gently. "But you're not alone in this. Marcus and I aren't the only ones who've been keeping tabs on the situation. Captain Rodriguez has been making some calls. If Morrison's group wants to turn this into a war, they have no idea what they're up against." That afternoon, as Sarah worked her shift at the clinic, she received a text message that made her pause in the middle of examining a patient. "Package delivered to your house. Check the garage when you get home." When Sarah and Miguel returned home that evening, she found that the package was actually a comprehensive surveillance and security system that Marcus had installed throughout their house. Cameras covered every angle, motion sensors protected the perimeter, and a secure communication system connected her directly to her former teammates. "Mom, why are there cameras everywhere?" Miguel asked as they discovered yet another hidden device. Sarah sat down with her son on their living room couch, knowing she could no longer shield him from the reality of their situation. "Miguel, remember how those men at the mall threatened us? Well, they have friends who are still angry about what happened. So some of my friends from the Navy are helping to make sure we stay safe. Miguel nodded solemnly. Are the bad men going to try to hurt us? They might try, Sarah said honestly. But if they do, they're going to discover that your mom has some very good friends who know how to stop bad people. As if on cue, Sarah's secure communication device chimed with an incoming message. The text was brief but ominous. Morrison and 4 associates spotted conducting surveillance of your neighborhood this afternoon. Recommend immediate defensive posture. We have Overwatch. Sarah looked at her 8-year-old son, who was now living in a house equipped with military-grade security systems because racist extremists had targeted their family. The quiet life she had tried to build was crumbling around them. But she was not the helpless victim Morrison and his friends believed her to be. Miguel, how would you like to go camping this weekend? She asked, already formulating a plan that would draw Morrison's group away from populated areas where innocent people might be caught in the crossfire. Really? Can we bring the helicopter? We can bring whatever you want, sweetheart. It's going to be an adventure. What Sarah didn't tell Miguel was that this camping trip would serve as bait for a trap that would end Morrison's threat permanently. Her former teammates were already positioning themselves, and, by the weekend, the true patriots would learn what happened when they declared war on a Navy SEAL. Sarah chose Blackwood State Park for their camping trip, a remote location 40 miles outside Riverside with dense forest coverage and limited access points. What Morrison and his True Patriots group didn't know was that Sarah had spent 2 days surveying the area with Marcus and Elena, identifying strategic positions and escape routes. The camping trip was carefully orchestrated bait designed to draw the extremist group away from populated areas where innocent people might be hurt. Miguel was thrilled about the adventure, chattering excitedly as they set up their tent near a small clearing beside a rushing creek. To him, this was a fun weekend getaway with his mom. He had no idea that hidden throughout the surrounding forest were his mother's former teammates, equipped with military-grade surveillance equipment and weapons. Can we fly the helicopter here, Mom? Miguel asked as he helped stake down the tent corners. Of course, sweetheart. Just be careful not to crash it into the trees, Sarah replied, maintaining the cheerful facade while her eyes continuously scanned the tree line for any sign of movement. Elena's voice crackled quietly through Sarah's nearly invisible earpiece. Movement on the south ridge. 3 vehicles approaching on the access road. Looks like our friends took the bait. Sarah's pulse quickened, but she kept her expression calm as she watched Miguel unpack his remote-controlled helicopter. Hey buddy, why don't you go gather some firewood while there's still light? Stay close to the campsite, okay? Can I bring the helicopter? Leave it here for now. We'll fly it after dinner. As Miguel wandered around the immediate area collecting fallen branches, Sarah quickly checked her concealed weapons and communication gear. Marcus had provided her with a tactical vest hidden beneath her camping fleece, and her sidearm was secured in a shoulder holster that Miguel couldn't see. Sarah, they're parking about half a mile down the access road, Marcus reported through the comm system. 5 men, including Morrison. They're gearing up with hunting rifles and what looks like body armor. These guys came prepared for war. Any sign of law enforcement backup? Sarah asked quietly, pretending to organize their camping supplies. Negative. This is just us, which is probably better. No civilian officers to worry about, and no jurisdictional complications. Elena's voice joined the conversation. I count at least 2 automatic weapons among their gear. Whatever they're planning, they intend to make sure you don't walk away from it. Sarah felt the familiar calm that had always descended on her before combat operations. Her civilian worries and maternal anxieties faded, replaced by the clinical focus that had kept her alive through dozens of dangerous missions. Morrison's group had made a fatal error in judgment. They thought they were hunting a frightened single mother, but they were actually walking into a trap set by some of the most highly trained warriors in the world. Miguel returned with an armload of small branches, his face flushed with excitement from their outdoor adventure. Mom, I heard some cars earlier. Are there other campers here? Maybe, Sarah said casually. Sometimes hunters come through this area. Nothing to worry about. As darkness began to fall, Sarah built a campfire and prepared a simple dinner of canned soup and sandwiches. To any observer, they would appear to be a typical mother and son enjoying a peaceful camping trip. The orange firelight flickered across Miguel's animated face as he told her about the different birds he had seen and planned elaborate flight patterns for his helicopter. Contact in 15 minutes, Elena reported. They're moving through the forest on foot now, trying to approach your position from 3 different angles. Amateur hour. Their movement discipline is terrible. Sarah nodded slightly, then turned to Miguel with a bright smile. Hey, how about we play that memory game while we eat? The one where we try to remember all the countries we can think of. It was a subtle way to keep Miguel engaged and distracted while also testing his attention and focus. If the situation deteriorated rapidly, she might need him to follow complex instructions quickly and without question. As they played the game, Sarah's earpiece provided a steady stream of tactical updates from her teammates. Morrison's group was closing in, but their approach was clumsy and predictable. They were clearly amateur militants rather than trained soldiers, relying on superior numbers and firepower rather than skill and strategy. Sarah, they're in position, Marcus whispered through the comm. Morrison and one other man are approaching from your 9 o'clock, about 50 yards out. 2 more coming from your 3 o'clock, and the 5th is staying back with their vehicles, probably as a lookout. Copy that, Sarah murmured, then said more loudly to Miguel. Okay, buddy, I think it's time to get ready for bed. Can you go into the tent and get your pajamas on? Miguel groaned in the universal way of 8-year-olds who weren't ready to stop having fun. Mom, can't we stay up a little longer? We could make s'mores. Maybe tomorrow night. Go on, get ready for bed. As Miguel reluctantly crawled into their tent, Sarah stood up and stretched, using the movement to casually survey their surroundings. She could now hear the faint sounds of Morrison's men moving through the underbrush, their heavy footsteps and occasional whispered communications revealing their positions as clearly as if they were carrying flares. Contact imminent, Elena reported. They're about to break cover. Miguel's in the tent. Affirmative, Sarah replied quietly. Derek Morrison stepped into the firelight with his rifle raised, his face twisted with hatred and anticipation. Behind him came another man she didn't recognize, also armed and clearly eager for violence. From the other side of their campsite, 2 more figures emerged from the darkness. Well, the famous Navy SEAL. Morrison sneered, his rifle pointed directly at Sarah's chest. Not so tough without the element of surprise, are you? Sarah raised her hand slowly, appearing to surrender while actually positioning herself for rapid movement. What do you want, Morrison? I already kicked your ass once. Are you really that eager for a repeat performance? Morrison's face flushed with anger. You humiliated me in front of half the town. Made me look weak in front of people who need to respect me. That kind of disrespect has consequences. So you brought 4 friends to help you feel tough again? Sarah asked, her voice carrying the kind of calm mockery that she knew would enrage him further. Angry opponents made mistakes, and she needed Morrison's group to be as sloppy as possible. We brought enough firepower to make sure you and your little bastard don't cause any more problems, the second gunman said with a cruel laugh. The moment he mentioned Miguel, Sarah's demeanor shifted slightly. The change was subtle but unmistakable to anyone who knew how to read combat stress indicators. Morrison's men, however, missed the warning signs entirely. Here's how this is going to work, Morrison continued, clearly enjoying what he thought was his moment of triumph. First, we're going to make you watch while we teach your boy some manners. Then, we're going to make sure neither of you ever disrespect real Americans again. Sarah's earpiece crackled with Elena's voice. Sarah, Miguel's not in the tent. Thermal shows him about 20 yards behind your position, moving toward the creek. He must have slipped out the back when these idiots started making noise. Relief flooded through Sarah. Her son was safely away from the immediate danger zone. Now she could focus entirely on neutralizing the threat without worrying about collateral damage. You know what your problem is, Morrison? Sarah said conversationally, still appearing calm and controlled despite having 4 weapons pointed at her. What's that, you piece of trash? You picked a fight with someone way out of your league, and you're too stupid to realize it. Morrison started to respond angrily, but his words were cut off by the sharp crack of a sniper rifle. The gunman to Morrison's left dropped instantly, a red bloom spreading across his chest as he collapsed into the underbrush. Before Morrison could even begin to process what had happened, Sarah was in motion. She dropped low and rolled behind a large log as automatic weapons fire erupted from the remaining 3 men. Bark and Dirt exploded around her position, but she was already moving again, using the terrain and her knowledge of her teammates' positions to stay ahead of their desperate attempts to hit her. Marcus's voice came through her earpiece with clinical efficiency. 2 down, 3 remaining. Elena has Overwatch on your 6. You're clear to move east. Sarah drew her sidearm and sprinted toward a cluster of boulders that would provide better cover. Behind her, she could hear Morrison screaming orders at his remaining men, his voice high with panic and rage. Find her. Kill that bitch. What Morrison didn't understand was that his group had walked into a kill box designed by professionals who had perfected these tactics in the world's most dangerous combat zones. They were no longer hunting Sarah. They were being systematically eliminated by a coordinated team that could see them clearly while remaining completely invisible. Elena's rifle spoke again, and another of Morrison's men spun and fell, clutching his shoulder as blood seeped between his fingers. The wound wasn't fatal, but it removed him from the fight effectively. Now it was just Morrison and one remaining accomplice against 3 Navy SEALs who had complete control of the battlefield. The outcome was no longer in question. The only decision was whether Morrison would be allowed to survive to face justice or would force them to kill him. Morrison, Sarah called out from behind her cover. Your men are down. This is over. Throw down your weapon and surrender. Morrison's response was a wild burst of automatic fire that came nowhere close to her position. He was firing blindly into the darkness. His tactical discipline completely collapsed under the stress of watching his plan disintegrate around him. Marcus appeared behind Morrison like a ghost, his combat knife pressed against the man's throat before he could react. Drop the rifle or I open your carotid artery, Marcus said quietly. The weapon clattered to the ground as Morrison's hands shot up in terrified surrender. Sarah emerged from cover and approached the captured extremist leader. In the firelight, she could see the fear and hatred warring in his eyes. Here's what's going to happen, she told him calmly. My friends are going to call this into some federal agents who have been very interested in meeting you and your True Patriots organization. You're going to spend the next 20 years in federal prison, where I'm sure your white supremacist views will make you very popular with the other inmates. Morrison glared at her with impotent rage. This isn't over. There are more of us than you know. Maybe, Sarah acknowledged. But, after tonight, word is going to spread through your little network about what happens when you threaten a Navy SEAL's family. I have a feeling most of your friends will decide to find easier targets. Elena approached the campsite, her rifle slung casually across her shoulder. Miguel's safe. I found him by the creek, flying his helicopter. Kid's got good instincts. He moved away from the danger without being told. As federal agents arrived to process the scene and arrest Morrison's surviving men, Sarah walked down to the creek where Miguel was indeed flying his remote-controlled helicopter by moonlight, apparently oblivious to the firefight that had just concluded in the forest behind him. Mom, look how well it flies in the dark, he called out excitedly. That's wonderful, sweetheart, Sarah replied, pulling him into a tight hug. Are you ready to go home now? I think we've had enough adventure for one weekend. As they packed up their campsite under the watchful eyes of federal agents and her former teammates, Sarah realized that her quiet civilian life was probably over permanently. The story of this confrontation would spread just as widely as the first one, cementing her reputation as someone who should never be underestimated or threatened. But perhaps that wasn't such a bad thing. Miguel would grow up knowing that his mother was someone who would never back down from protecting the people she loved. He would understand that strength came in many forms, and that sometimes the most dangerous warriors were the ones who looked like ordinary people. 3 months later, Derek Morrison pled guilty to federal terrorism charges and was sentenced to 25 years in prison. His True Patriots organization disbanded after half of its leadership was arrested in a sweeping federal investigation. The surviving members quietly faded back into whatever holes they had crawled out of, having learned that some fights simply weren't worth picking. Sarah returned to her job at the community health clinic, though she now also worked part-time as a self-defense instructor and security consultant. Miguel continued to fly his helicopter and attend school like any other 8-year-old, though his classmates now looked at his mother with a new kind of respect and awe. Sometimes, on quiet Saturday afternoons, Sarah would take Miguel to the park and watch him play with other children, marveling at how normal their life had become again. But She never forgot the lessons of that weekend at Blackwood State Park, that the skills she had learned as a Navy SEAL weren't just part of her past, but an integral part of who she was and who she would always be. The warrior and the mother weren't separate identities competing for space in her life. They were two aspects of the same person, both dedicated to protecting the things that mattered most. And anyone foolish enough to threaten her family would discover that Sarah Martinez had never really left the battlefield. She had simply been waiting for the right reason to return to it.